Oops, my previous response was cut off. I'll continue with the complete part 1 in the requested single voiceover format. Alex, if you ignore this warning, you will lose the company you built with your own hands. The room went silent. Alexander Whitmore looked across the polished boardroom table, smiled, and slowly closed the folder in front of him. That's the same thing everyone has been telling me for months, he said. And somehow, I'm still sitting at the top. The executives around him exchanged uncomfortable looks, but Alex did not notice. Or maybe he simply did not care. Because for years, he had believed one thing above everything else. He was the smartest person in the room. The glass walls of Whitmore Capital Systems overlooked Manhattan, reflecting the image Alex had spent his entire life creating. A powerful CEO, a successful businessman, a man who never backed down. The company's newest acquisition was about to become the biggest deal of his career, and every headline was already prepared. But what Alex did not know was that the biggest threat to his empire was not coming from a competitor, a market crash, or a business rival. It was coming from the one person he had already decided no longer mattered. His ex-wife, Victoria Bennett. The shareholder concerns are not small, Alex, Claire Monroe, the company's CFO, said carefully. We need to review the documents before moving forward. Alex leaned back in his chair. Claire, we have been reviewing documents for 3 weeks. At some point, you have to stop looking for problems and start believing in the plan. He said it calmly, almost kindly. That was what made it worse. Alex never saw himself as reckless. He saw himself as decisive. He saw every warning as doubt from people who were too afraid to move forward. But Claire knew something Alex refused to accept. The numbers were changing. The contracts were not as clean as he believed. And there was one missing piece of information that could completely change the future of the company. There's still time to reconsider, Claire said. Alex stood up, adjusting the sleeve of his expensive suit. I already reconsidered once. That was enough. The meeting ended with Alex walking out first, leaving behind a room full of people who knew something he did not. 3 years earlier, Alex would have listened to Victoria Bennett. Back then, she was the person sitting beside him during the hardest nights of building the company. She was the woman who stayed awake reviewing his presentations, checking his numbers, and reminding him to slow down when ambition started becoming dangerous. But success changed the way Alex saw the world. Slowly, he stopped seeing Victoria as his partner. He started seeing her as someone who belonged to his past. Their divorce had been quiet, but the damage had been deep. Alex believed he was finally free to build the future he wanted. Victoria believed she was finally free to stop shrinking herself for someone who no longer valued her. What Alex never understood was that Victoria was not walking away empty-handed. She was walking away with knowledge, patience, and something he never expected her to have, a plan. That afternoon, as Alex prepared for the final board meeting that would decide the future of his company, his assistant placed a sealed envelope on his desk. This came for you this morning, she said. Alex opened it without concern. Inside was a single document and a handwritten note. He recognized Victoria's handwriting immediately. The message was only one sentence. I warned you because I wanted you to choose differently. Alex stared at the words for a moment, then placed the paper down and shook his head. He thought it was an emotional goodbye from a woman who still could not let go. He had no idea it was the final warning he would ever receive. And in exactly 3 weeks, the same boardroom where he celebrated his greatest victory would become the place where he lost everything. I can continue with part 2 following the same pacing, character logic, and emotional build. 3 years earlier, before the headlines, before the boardrooms, before Alexander Whitmore became the man everyone feared disappointing, there was a woman who believed in him when almost no one else did. Her name was Victoria Bennett. Back then, Alex did not have a company that filled an entire floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. He had a small office, a borrowed conference room, and an idea that kept him awake every night. Victoria was the person sitting across from him at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, reviewing his business plans while a cold cup of coffee sat untouched beside her. You know this can work, she would tell him. But you cannot build something great by destroying yourself. Alex would smile and take her hand. That is why I need you. You keep me grounded. And for a while, he meant every word. Victoria was not just his wife. She was the person who saw the dream before the world noticed it. She helped him prepare presentations, organize ideas, and make decisions when everything felt uncertain. She never cared about luxury or status. She cared about building a life together. But success has a way of changing people. As Whitmore Capital Systems grew, Alex started spending more time with investors, executives, and people who constantly reminded him how important he was. Slowly, the man who once asked Victoria for advice began acting like he no longer needed it. "You worry too much," Alex told her one evening when she questioned a risky business decision. Victoria looked at him quietly. "I am not trying to stop you, Alex. I am trying to protect what we built." He looked away. "Sometimes I think you are holding me back because you are afraid of change." Those words stayed with her. Not because they were angry, but because they showed her something painful. Alex no longer saw her as his partner. He saw her as an obstacle. Their marriage did not fall apart in one dramatic moment. It happened slowly. A missed dinner became normal. A conversation became an argument. A simple question became something Alex considered criticism. Victoria tried to hold everything together, but she eventually realized she was fighting for a relationship that only one person was trying to save. The divorce papers were signed on a quiet morning in a small attorney's office. There were no cameras, no shouting, no public drama. Just two people sitting across from each other, accepting that the life they imagined was gone. "I hope you find what you are looking for," Victoria said softly. Alex nodded, already thinking about his next business meeting. "I think this is the right decision for both of us." He truly believed it. He believed Victoria would eventually move on and disappear from his world. What he did not understand was that leaving him was not Victoria's defeat. It was the first time in years she had chosen herself. After the divorce, Victoria returned to the part of her life she had placed on hold. She started rebuilding her confidence, reconnecting with people she had lost touch with, and quietly studying every part of the company she once helped create. She did not need revenge. She needed clarity. Because while Alex was busy proving he could succeed without her, Victoria was discovering something he had forgotten. She had never been successful because of him. She had been successful long before he learned her name. And soon, Alex would discover that the person he underestimated the most was the person who understood his empire better than anyone. After the divorce, Alexander Whitmore moved through life as if nothing had changed. In his mind, the hardest decision he had ever made was also the smartest one. He told himself that Victoria Bennett was part of an old chapter, a chapter he had already closed. Within months, Alex transformed the story of their separation into a business lesson he could tell investors. "Sometimes you have to remove distractions to reach the next level," he said during interviews. People admired his confidence. They saw a successful CEO who was focused, ambitious, and determined. But they did not see the choices he was making behind closed doors. They did not see the warnings he ignored. Inside Whitmore Capital Systems, things were beginning to shift. The company was growing quickly, but the speed came with risks. Alex pushed for larger acquisitions, faster expansion, and bigger promises to investors. He believed hesitation was weakness. Anyone who questioned him was labeled as someone who did not understand his vision. "We are not here to play safe," Alex told his executive team during a Monday morning meeting. "The companies that win are the ones willing to take chances." Most people nodded. They always did. Alex had built a reputation where confidence often mattered more than caution. But Claire Monroe, the company's chief financial officer, was not convinced. After the meeting, she stayed behind while everyone else left the room. "Alex, can we talk for a minute?" she asked. He looked at his watch. "If this is about the acquisition timeline, I already made the decision." Claire placed a folder on the table. "It is not just about the timeline. There are concerns about the financial structure. Some of these agreements need another review." Alex opened the folder but barely looked at the pages. "Claire, we have lawyers for this. We have analysts for this. I hired experts because I trust them to do their jobs." She took a breath. "I am not questioning the team. I am questioning whether you are listening to anyone who disagrees with you." For a moment, the room became quiet. Those words reminded Alex of Victoria. Years ago, she had said something almost identical. But instead of hearing concern, he heard criticism. "You sound exactly like her," Alex said. Claire noticed the change in his expression. "Victoria was not always wrong, Alex." He closed the folder. "That is enough." He walked away before the conversation could continue. Meanwhile, Victoria was building a completely different life. She no longer followed every headline about Alex. She no longer checked how his company was performing. She had learned that peace came when she stopped measuring her worth through someone else's success. But she was not unaware of what was happening. Through her professional connections, she knew Whitmore Capital Systems was moving too quickly. She knew Alex was making decisions based on confidence instead of careful planning. Daniel Brooks, her attorney, placed several documents on her desk one afternoon. "Victoria, you should know that the situation is becoming exactly what you predicted." She looked down at the papers. "I hoped I was wrong." Daniel studied her carefully. "You still care about him." Victoria was silent for a moment. Then she answered quietly, "I cared about the person he used to be. That does not mean I can ignore what he is doing now." Daniel nodded. "Then what happens next?" Victoria looked out at the city skyline. She remembered the woman she had been 3 years earlier, the woman who kept making herself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. That woman was gone. "Nothing happens next," she said calmly. "The truth happens next." And while Alex continued preparing for what he believed would be the greatest achievement of his career, he never realized that every warning he dismissed was bringing him closer to the one meeting he could not control. Victoria Bennett spent 3 years being underestimated, but she had learned something important during that time. People often reveal their true intentions when they believe no one is watching. And Alexander Whitmore had been showing his for a long time. Every decision he made, every shortcut he took, every warning he ignored was carefully documented. Not because Victoria wanted to destroy him, because she wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside of his control. On a quiet Tuesday morning, Victoria sat across from Daniel Brooks in a small office overlooking downtown Chicago. Unlike Alex's massive corner office in Manhattan, there were no expensive decorations or signs meant to impress visitors. There was only a desk, a few folders, and a woman who had finally stopped trying to prove her value to someone else. Daniel placed a document in front of her. "The board is becoming concerned," he said. "Several executives have noticed the same pattern. Alex is making decisions faster than the company can handle." Victoria looked at the papers, but did not immediately respond. "And what happens if nobody stops him?" Daniel asked. She slowly closed the folder. "Then the board will have to make their own decision." Daniel watched her carefully. "You know you could have warned him again." Victoria gave a small, tired smile. "I already did." Her mind went back to the last conversation she had with Alex after their divorce. She had not called to argue. She had not called to reopen old wounds. She had simply tried to give him one final chance. "Alex, I know you do not want to hear this," she had said, "but you are making decisions without looking at what is happening underneath." Alex had responded with the same confidence he always carried. "Victoria, you do not work here anymore. You need to stop worrying about things that are not yours." Those words hurt more than he knew. Not because he was angry, but because they confirmed what she had already accepted. He no longer saw her as someone who helped build his success. He only saw her as someone from his past. Back in the present, Daniel looked at her. "Do you regret not fighting harder for your marriage?" Victoria looked out the window. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then she answered honestly, "I fought for it every day while I was in it." Her voice remained calm. There comes a point where fighting for someone becomes losing yourself. Across the country, Alex was preparing for what he believed would be his greatest professional achievement. The acquisition announcement was scheduled. Investors were excited. The media was ready. His team had prepared every detail. To Alex, the future looked exactly how he wanted it to look. But inside the company, doubts were growing. Claire Monroe reviewed financial reports late into the evening, comparing numbers and questioning decisions that had been approved too quickly. She knew something was wrong. The problem was that Alex did not want to know. The next morning, Claire entered his office. "Alex, I need you to look at these numbers before the board meeting." He continued reading an email without looking up. "Claire, we already discussed this." "No, we discussed your decision. We did not discuss the consequences." That sentence finally made him look up. "Are you telling me you do not support me?" Claire shook her head. "I am telling you that leadership is not about having everyone agree with you." Alex stood from his desk. "I built this company because I trusted my instincts." Claire quietly replied, "And sometimes your instincts are the reason people are warning you." Alex said nothing, but instead of listening, he walked away. That evening, Victoria received confirmation that the board meeting date had been finalized. She stared at the message on her phone for a long moment. This was not the ending she had imagined when her marriage ended. She never wanted Alex to lose everything. She only wanted him to understand what he had ignored. Daniel called her later that night. Victoria, are you ready? She looked at the old wedding photo sitting on her shelf, then placed it face down. I have been ready for a long time. And for the first time in years, the future would no longer belong to Alexander Whitmore alone. The morning of the board meeting arrived with the kind of silence that usually comes before something important changes. Inside the headquarters of Whitmore Capital Systems, employees moved quickly through the halls, carrying folders, tablets, and coffee cups, unaware that the company they worked for was about to enter a completely different chapter. Alexander Whitmore arrived early. He stepped out of the elevator wearing the same confidence he carried everywhere. His suit was perfectly pressed. His schedule was perfectly planned. In his mind, this was not a difficult day. It was a celebration. Today is the day we prove everyone wrong, Alex told his assistant as he walked toward his office. His assistant smiled politely, but she noticed something different. There was a nervous energy throughout the building. People were talking quietly. Executives were reviewing documents one more time. Everyone seemed to know something was coming. Everyone except Alex. Inside the conference room, the board members slowly took their seats. Claire Monroe sat with a folder in front of her, her expression serious. She had spent the previous night reviewing every detail one final time. She did not want Alex to fail. She wanted him to understand before it was too late. A few minutes later, Alex entered the room. Good morning, he said confidently. I think we all know why we are here. He placed his presentation on the screen and began discussing growth numbers, future expansion, and the acquisition that he believed would secure his legacy. For several minutes, everything went exactly how he expected. Then one board member interrupted. Alex, before we move forward, there is another matter we need to address. Alex stopped speaking. What matter? The board member looked down at the documents in front of him. A concern regarding shareholder rights and company governance. Alex looked toward Claire. Is this what we talked about yesterday? Claire held his gaze. No, Alex. This is bigger. For the first time that morning, Alex looked uncertain. But only for a moment. Whatever this is, we can handle it. The door opened. Everyone turned. Victoria Bennett walked into the room. Alex froze. For a few seconds, he simply stared at her. The woman standing in front of him looked nothing like the person he remembered leaving behind. She was calm, composed, completely in control. Victoria, Alex finally said, what are you doing here? She walked toward the empty chair at the table. I am here because I was invited. Alex gave a short laugh, almost unable to believe what he was hearing. Invited? This is a board meeting. Victoria looked at him. I know. The room became quiet. Daniel Brooks entered behind her carrying a folder. He placed it on the table and looked at the board members. For the record, Victoria Bennett is not attending as a guest. She is attending as a shareholder. Alex's expression changed. That is impossible. Daniel calmly opened the folder. Actually, it has been documented for years. Alex looked around the room, waiting for someone to confirm his disbelief. Nobody did. Claire lowered her eyes because she knew this moment was coming. Victoria, what is this? Alex asked. His voice was no longer confident. It was confused. Victoria looked at the man she once loved. She remembered the nights they spent building dreams together. She remembered believing they would always stand on the same side. But she also remembered the moment he stopped listening. Alex, I tried to tell you, she said quietly. You just decided you did not need to hear me. The words were not angry. That was what made them heavier. The board members began reviewing the documents. Page after page. Agreement after agreement. The room that Alex once controlled was becoming a place where he had no answers. For the first time in years, Alexander Whitmore was not the person with the most power in the room. And he was about to discover that the woman he thought he left behind had been the one person who saw everything coming. The room that once belonged to Alexander Whitmore now felt unfamiliar. The same long table, the same glass walls, the same view of the city, but everything had changed. For the first time in years, Alex was sitting in a room where confidence could not protect him. Daniel Brooks placed the documents in front of the board members one by one. These agreements were created before the company reached its current valuation, Daniel explained. They were designed to protect certain shareholder rights and prevent decisions from being made without proper approval. Alex looked through the pages quickly, searching for something that would prove this was a misunderstanding. Victoria, explain this. His voice carried frustration, but underneath it was something else. Confusion. Victoria remained calm. There is nothing to explain. Alex. The documents say exactly what they were always supposed to say. He looked at her in disbelief. You knew about this the entire time? Victoria paused. I knew about the agreements. I did not know you would ignore every person who tried to warn you. Those words hit harder than he expected. Because deep down, Alex knew they were true. He remembered every conversation he dismissed. Every concern he called unnecessary. Every person he told to trust his judgment. Claire opened another folder. The issue is not only the shareholder agreement. There are also concerns regarding the recent acquisition strategy. Alex turned toward her. Claire, are you serious? She took a breath. I am saying the company needs accountability. For years, Claire had watched Alex turn every disagreement into a personal challenge. But this was no longer about proving who was right. It was about protecting thousands of employees who depended on the company. Daniel continued. Several decisions were approved without proper review. The board has the right to investigate whether those decisions were in the best interest of the company. Alex leaned back in his chair, trying to regain control. So this is what this is about. You are all questioning my leadership because my ex-wife walked into this room. Victoria looked down for a moment. She expected anger. She expected him to blame her. But hearing him say it still hurt. Because even now, he was looking for someone else to blame. Alex, she said quietly, this did not start today. He looked at her. Then when did it start? Victoria answered honestly. The first time you stopped listening. The room went silent. There was no anger in her voice. No desire to embarrass him. Just the truth. Alex remembered the early days when Victoria sat beside him and helped him build everything from nothing. He remembered asking for her opinion. He remembered trusting her instincts. Somewhere along the way, he convinced himself that needing someone was a weakness, and losing her became the first warning sign he ignored. What do you want? Alex finally asked. Victoria looked surprised by the question. What do I want? She repeated. I want the company protected. I want employees protected. I want decisions to be based on facts, not ego. Alex studied her face, searching for the revenge he expected. But he did not find it. That bothered him more than anger would have. Because Victoria was not there to destroy him. She was there because she had accepted something he had not. The company was bigger than him. The board continued reviewing the information. Every document revealed another piece of a picture Alex refused to see. The acquisition he celebrated was no longer a symbol of success. It was becoming evidence of poor judgment. And the people who once followed him without question were beginning to question everything. As the meeting moved forward, Alex looked around the table and realized something terrifying. He was still sitting in the same chair. But he was no longer the person controlling the room. For the first time, Alexander Whitmore understood the difference between having power and actually having trust. And trust was something he had spent years losing. By the end of the board meeting, Alexander Whitmore was no longer thinking about the acquisition. He was no longer thinking about the headlines, the investors, or the celebration he had planned for himself. He was thinking about one question. How did he not see this coming? The meeting continued for another hour, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The people around the table were no longer listening to a CEO explaining his vision. They were reviewing the decisions of a man who had stopped accepting questions. Claire Monroe presented the final financial review. Her voice remained professional, but every word carried weight. The concerns are not about one single decision, Alex. They are about a pattern. Alex looked at her. A pattern. Claire nodded. A pattern of moving forward without enough review. A pattern of dismissing people who raise concerns. A pattern of believing confidence can replace preparation. The words were difficult to hear because they were not coming from an enemy. They were coming from someone who had worked beside him for years. Someone who had watched the company grow. Someone who wanted to believe he could still change. Alex looked toward Victoria. Did you know this would happen? Victoria shook her head. No, her answer was immediate. I knew there would be consequences if you kept making the same choices. But I did not know exactly when they would arrive. Alex let out a quiet breath. So you just waited. Victoria looked at him. No, Alex. I stopped trying to control a situation that was never mine to control. That answer stayed with him. Because it was the opposite of what he expected. He expected anger. He expected satisfaction. He expected Victoria to enjoy watching him struggle. But she did not look happy. She looked tired. Like someone who had spent years carrying something heavy and finally put it down. The board members continued their discussion and eventually reached a decision. Alex would remain in his position temporarily, but an independent review would begin immediately. His authority over major company decisions would be limited until the review was completed. It was not a public removal. It was not a dramatic scene. But for Alex, it felt like the first crack in everything he had built. Outside the meeting room, reporters were already waiting for a statement about the acquisition. Employees were checking internal messages, trying to understand what was happening. The company that once moved according to Alex's confidence was now moving according to caution. Later that afternoon, Alex returned to his office and closed the door. For the first time in years, he sat alone without a schedule telling him what to do next. On his desk was a framed photo from the early days of the company. In the picture, he and Victoria were standing in their first small office, smiling because they had no idea how difficult the journey would become. He picked up the frame and stared at it. He remembered the woman who stayed up late helping him prepare. The woman who warned him when he was moving too fast. The woman who believed in him before the world did. His phone rang. It was his assistant. "Mr. Whitmore, there is one more thing you should know." Alex looked toward the window. "What is it?" There was a pause. "Several investors are requesting meetings with Victoria Bennett." Alex froze, because in that moment, he understood something he had not considered before. Victoria was not just someone who knew his company. She was someone people trusted. And trust was the one thing he could no longer buy back. That evening, Alex walked out of the building later than usual. The city lights reflected against the glass towers around him. But for the first time, they did not make him feel powerful. They reminded him of everything he had ignored. Meanwhile, Victoria sat with Daniel reviewing the next steps. "Are you sure you want to continue?" Daniel asked. Victoria looked at the documents in front of her. This was never about taking his place. She closed the folder. It was about making sure he could not keep hurting everyone who depended on him. And while Alex was finally beginning to understand what he had lost, Victoria was preparing for the final decision that would determine the future of the company. For the first time in years, Alexander Whitmore had nothing to prove. And that was the one thing he did not know how to handle. His entire life had been built around moving forward, chasing the next achievement, the next deal, the next moment where everyone would have to admit he was right. But now, sitting alone in his office after everyone had left, Alex was forced to face something he had avoided for a long time. The problem was not that people stopped believing in him. The problem was that he had stopped giving them a reason to. He looked again at the old photo sitting on his desk. It was from the first year of Whitmore Capital Systems, back when the company was just an idea and a few late nights in a small office. Victoria was standing beside him, holding a stack of papers, smiling like she truly believed they could build something meaningful together. Alex remembered that version of himself. He remembered asking for her opinion. He remembered trusting her judgment. Then he remembered the day he told her she was holding him back. The memory felt different now. Back then, he thought he was choosing success over comfort. Now, he wondered if he had simply confused support with weakness. The next morning, Alex arrived at the office earlier than usual. He expected the same familiar routine. Employees greeting him. Assistants updating his schedule. Executives waiting for instructions. But something had changed. People were polite, but distant. They were no longer looking at him like the person who had every answer. They were waiting to see what happened next. Alex walked into Claire Monroe's office. "You knew this was coming," he said. Claire looked up from her computer. "I knew the company needed someone to listen." Alex crossed his arms. "You could have come directly to me." Claire gave him a serious look. "I did. Several times." The silence that followed was uncomfortable because Alex knew she was right. "Why did nobody stop me?" he asked. Claire leaned back. "People tried, Alex. But every warning sounded like an attack to you." Those words stayed with him. Because he realized something painful. He had not lost control in one day. He had been losing trust one conversation at a time. Later that afternoon, Alex asked to meet with Victoria. Daniel was surprised when he heard the request. "Are you sure this is what you want?" he asked her. Victoria thought for a moment before answering. "Yes." When she arrived, Alex was waiting in a quiet conference room. No executives. No cameras. No audience. Just two people who once knew each other better than anyone else. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Alex said, "I owe you an apology." Victoria looked at him, but said nothing. "I spent years believing you were trying to slow me down," he continued. "But you were the only person trying to make sure I did not lose everything." Victoria lowered her eyes briefly. Hearing those words meant something, but it did not erase the past. "Alex, I never wanted this to happen." He nodded. "I know. "I did not come back to hurt you," she said. "I came back because people were being affected by decisions you refused to reconsider." Alex looked away. "I thought you wanted revenge." Victoria answered calmly. "Revenge would have been easy. Walking away was harder." That sentence stayed between them, because Alex finally understood the difference. Victoria was not powerful because she could take something from him. She was powerful because she no longer needed anything from him. Before leaving, Alex asked one final question. "Is there any way to fix this?" Victoria paused at the door. "The company can recover. Your reputation can recover. But only if you stop trying to prove you are right and start accepting when you are wrong." After she left, Alex remained in the room alone. For years, he believed losing Victoria was the price of becoming successful. Now he realized she was the person who had been protecting him from losing everything. And somewhere deep inside, he knew the next board decision would decide not only the future of his company, but the kind of person he would become. 6 months later, the headquarters of Whitmore Capital Systems looked different. The same glass walls stood above Manhattan. The same employees walked through the same doors every morning. But the atmosphere had changed. The company was no longer built around one person's confidence. It was built around a team of people who finally felt heard. Alexander Whitmore sat quietly in the back of the conference room during the annual company meeting. He was no longer standing at the front, speaking as if every answer belonged to him. He was listening. And for someone like Alex, listening had become the hardest lesson of his life. The independent review had ended. The board had made its final decision. Alex would no longer serve as the company's only decision-maker. Instead, he remained involved in a smaller leadership role while a new structure was created. At first, he hated it. He felt like he had lost the identity he spent years building. But slowly, something unexpected happened. He started hearing things he had ignored before. Employees shared ideas without fear. Executives raised concerns without worrying about his reaction. Problems were solved before they became disasters. The company was becoming stronger because people finally felt safe telling the truth. Victoria Bennett watched from a distance. She had never wanted Alex's position. She had never wanted his downfall. She wanted something much simpler. She wanted people to stop being afraid of one person's ego. One afternoon, Victoria and Daniel walked through the company's new investment office. "You know," Daniel said, "a lot of people expected you to destroy him." Victoria smiled slightly. "People confuse justice with revenge." Daniel looked at her. "What is the difference?" Victoria thought for a moment. "Revenge is about making someone feel your pain. Justice is about making sure the same pain does not happen to someone else." Those words explained everything she had done. She had not returned because she was angry. She had returned because she remembered what it felt like to be ignored. Years earlier, when she stood beside Alex, she slowly disappeared inside a life built around his dreams. She stopped asking what she wanted. She stopped believing her own voice mattered. Losing that marriage had hurt, but finding herself again had been the greatest thing she gained. A few weeks later, Alex asked to meet her one last time. They sat in a quiet coffee shop, far away from boardrooms and business decisions. For once, they were just two people talking honestly. "I spent so much time trying to become someone everyone respected," Alex said. "I forgot to become someone people could trust." Victoria looked at him and nodded. "That is something you have to decide for yourself." He looked down at his coffee. "Do you think I can change?" Victoria answered after a moment. "I think people can change when they finally stop protecting the version of themselves that caused the damage." Alex took those words with him. Their lives were no longer connected the way they once were. There was no perfect reunion. No pretending the past never happened. Some things cannot be repaired by simply saying sorry. But some lessons arrive exactly when people are ready to hear them. A year later, Victoria stood in front of a group of young entrepreneurs speaking about leadership. She did not talk about Alex. She did not talk about the divorce. She talked about knowing your value, trusting your instincts, and never allowing someone else's opinion to become the measure of your worth. Because the greatest victory was not watching someone else fall. The greatest victory was realizing you were strong enough to stand on your own. And somewhere in the same city where Alexander Whitmore once believed he had everything, two people learned the same lesson in completely different ways. Money can build an empire. Power can open doors. Success can change how the world sees you. But character is what determines who you become when everything else is taken away.